I work in a warehouse that my father purchased. He bought it for around a quarter of its cost from a farmer who seemed very excited to be rid of it. It's located in the middle of Mennonite country, with no neighbors for half a mile around. If you look out the window, you'll see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Not even a single bar. I work here alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse into a secondary office, and then through another door into the front. I frequently hear bumps and thuds, and occasionally will go into the warehouse and feel air movement, but I've always just attributed it to drafts and animal life in the roof. The only thing that's ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all of the door locks are reversed. Whoever installed the locks didn't intend to keep people out. They intended to keep something in. I was in the front office when I began to hear the thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time, it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, but audible. I was freaked out, but convinced myself that it was just an angered raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. I continued working until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been opened, and then it sounded like it violently slammed shut. I peeked around the corner and saw that I was right. The secondary door was now closed. I tried to logically parse it in my head that a strong draft had sucked it closed, although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding began again, closer this time. I've never been able to put a proximity on it, but it sounded like it was right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes locked onto the door handle, which began to turn. The sudden animation of the door lock twisting gave me goosebumps. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider and wider, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible. No air movement. Just silence. It was so quiet. A quietness that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence. A quiet so thick, I couldn't breathe. The quietness was shattered when the screech came again. This time, it was clearly human. Pained, angered, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door slammed shut. The abruptly loud noise entirely broke my frozen, fearful state, and I ran. I got into my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. He didn't believe anything about the doors closing, but agreed that the building had something weird about it. He told me he'd be right out. Fast forward about half an hour. My dad and I meet up and drove back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that had slammed, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so it wasn't possible that draft could have closed it. I told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quietness that overcame the building. He decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something you should know about this warehouse: it was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on, the floor is thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust was untouched, the doors were closed, and the windows were locked. The only thing out of the ordinary was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew and swaying slightly. Insisting that we take a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose, my dad grabbed a stepladder. He supported it while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked on top of the light and saw a handprint, a single, fresh, inhumanly large handprint. No footprints in the dust around the light, no signs of a presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse light system. He just couldn't believe that this thing wasn't human, that something wasn't right here. The last thing he said was, "Nothing's here. Next time just ignore it and go back to work." As if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud. The beating quickly started shaking the warehouse. The entire building felt like it was moved. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by a screech. The awful, awful screech. It felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. We ran, and I've never returned. My father hired someone to finish my job, and he's since moved into the office. He's heard the thudding, but so far nothing else has happened. There's something paranormal in that building, and the man who sold it to us knew that. I'll never forget the sudden wave of silence after the door unlocked itself. It was as if I was peering into an endless void, a spaceless vortex of loneliness and isolation. I still have the same recurring nightmare, always revealing that the silence is my afterlife.